Hi, everybody, and welcome to week 2 of Bio 1184 Medical Terminology. So this week we are going to be covering the unit on medical terms associated with cancer. So this unit is actually not from your textbook. It was created by the professors here at the college using data from research articles and really great sources. So we're going to go over medical terms that are associated with cancer, go over what cancer is, and also some screening methods and technologies that are used in cancer treatment. So as a reminder, the crosswords are posted each week and practice problems in each week's content folder to help you with your studying. Reminder again, this chapter is not from the OER textbook, so this is going to solely come from the PowerPoint that is posted and from what we talk about in this narrated lecture. So that's the material that you're responsible for the cancer unit. Also, please note that your first assessment will be available this week. That is for marks. So this is worksheet 1, and it's going to be made available tomorrow. So it's going to be made available tomorrow morning under assessments quizzes, and it's due on January 23rd. So it's due this Friday at 5 p.m. So it'll be open for the week. You can save your progress and go back into the worksheet. You can use your resources. So the worksheet isn't timed, so you can start it, save your progress, and go back to it. Just please be sure that you submit the worksheet before Friday at 5 p.m. so that your work is submitted and is not lost. So that is the only way that you can be graded and receive your grade, is if you press submit once you finish the worksheet. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me and reach out at any time. Okay, let's dive in. So we're going to be discussing cancer. And this slide here shows the Canadian Cancer Society website. So we're going to be going over some statistics associated with cancer. Now, cancer itself is a term for diseases in which abnormal cells divide without control and can invade nearby tissues. So the big key here to note is without control. So we're going to be talking about how cancer cells have essentially a unique blueprint from which they behave differently from regular cells, and we'll talk about what that looks like in the body. Cancer cells can rapidly spread, which the term for this is metastasis. So we'll talk about some key terms here. Metastasis means spreading to other parts of the body, and this can occur through the blood or through the lymphatic system. The term malignant is used to describe cancer cells, and malignancy is the state or presence of a malignant tumor. So the state or presence of cancer cells. Now, one term that we make note about in terms of cancer is PYLL, or potential years of lost life. This is a very common metric that is used to measure the societal impact that a disease has in a country or region. So if an average life expectancy of an individual is, say, around 80 years old, such as that, close to that in Canada, and say the individual dies at the age of 50, the loss of years of life, or PYLL, would be 30 years for that region. So this takes into account life expectancy as well as the age of death of that individual. So note that this is largely based on life expectancy for a particular regions. So some regions have a much higher or even lower life expectancy. So this graph that's here shows the PYLL in thousands, and it's split for males and females. Now, many causes of death, of course, exist, and here are some of the most common causes of death, particularly that we see in Canada. So this chart is for 2014 to 2016. The largest component here, as we can see in Canada, that has contributed to years of life lost is largely cancer for both men and women, so for both males and females. This takes all these other diseases into account, accidents, heart disease, suicide respiratory disease. So cancer is largely the very leading contributor to potential years of life lost, or the term PYLL. So in the top left here, this is showing how large the influence of cancer is in causing death, and is one of the leading causes of death in Canada. And so we can see there are just another representation here showing the large proportion of deaths that are caused by cancer each year. And the bottom left here is the lifetime probability of developing cancer. And we can see here that for both sexes combined, there is a 44% chance or probability of developing cancer. This is quite high, right? And really eye-opening. And very slightly higher in males, actually. So around 45% for males and 43% for females, but quite similar. But overall big takeaway here is, again, that cancer is the number one cause of death in Canada. And 220,000 or so Canadians will be diagnosed with cancer. And this was projected for 2019. So we'll see trending numbers over time. But this just kind of show the impact that cancer does have on society. Now, if we look at all different types of cancer, because cancer is a family of basically illnesses, and we'll talk about that and more the cancer biology, but if we look at all different types of cancers, and this graph is showing the lifetime probability of developing or dying from cancer and the probability of developing cancer by age in Canada. So this here is for males, and we can see the probability of developing cancer. We see that 44.5, and the probability of dying of cancer is 29.5%. Now, the probability we can see by age does increase as we get older. So with increasing age, the probability of developing cancer does increase. Now, the probability of developing pancreatic cancer in males, we can see here this 1.3%. And the probability of dying is also 1.3%. So pancreatic cancer is one cancer that is currently very difficult to treat. This is one of these cancers that is very hard to treat, and therefore a high percentage of death upon diagnosis. Some other ones to kind of make note of here is non-Hodgkin lymphoma. So non-Hodgkin lymphoma is a group of blood cancers. These are cancers that start in white blood cells, and they affect the immune system. They may appear as swollen lymph nodes, which is where lymph nodes are where a high population of immune cells reside in our lymphatic system, such as lymph nodes in the neck. Lymph nodes are in the armpit or in the groin area, and they contain immune cells. And so non-Hodgkin lymphoma is another type of cancer that has it's pretty difficult to treat, but pancreatic still remains the most difficult to treat. And we also highlight the highest likelihood, or the type of cancer which has the highest likelihood of developing for males, is prostate by quite a bit. So we see 13.5% of developing, versus the next highest would be 8.6% for lung cancer. So for males in particular, prostate cancer holds the highest likelihood. And many advances have been made in prostate cancer research and in treatments. And so we see a much lower percent of dying in the case of prostate cancer as compared to pancreatic cancer, for example. Now, this is the same chart, but for females. So now this table is highlighting the same statistics, but in females. And we can see that in females, the highest percent of developing this type of cancer is breast cancer. So breast cancer holds the highest probability of developing, and also something that there have been many advances in detection for breast cancer. So early screening, and we're going to talk about that in the end of this lecture, but screening has made detecting and then therefore early detection and treatment of breast cancer much easier with these screening advances. So another one here, we also see non-Hodgkin lymphoma, very similar between males and females, and also highlighting that pancreatic cancer statistic here, right, of being the percent of developing and the percent of dying are showcasing how difficult pancreatic cancer is to treat once someone is diagnosed with it. So in terms of these tables, we want to be familiar with the incidence, so the percent, not necessarily specific numbers, but just being aware of, for males versus females, which types of cancer are most prevalent, and also which ones remain the most difficult to treat. And also having an idea of the fact that with increasing age, the probability of developing cancer becomes higher. Okay, so for this chart, we're looking at new cases of cancer by age group. So at a given age, say right here, this is 0 to 14 years old, 15 to 29 years old, 30 to 49 years old, 50 to 69, and so forth. For a given age category, it is showing the types of cancers that have the most new cases. So, for example, here for young individuals aged 0 to 14, the type of cancer that has the most new cases, or there's the highest probability for individuals aged 0 to 14 of developing leukemia compared to other cancers. So in young people, the most common cancer that we see where cancer diagnoses exist in individuals under the age of 14 is leukemia, and second to that is CNS, so central nervous system or brain cancer, for example. And then we can see, and I just would like you to pay attention really to the most probable ones by age. So noting that in children, leukemia is one of the most commonly diagnosed cancers. And we can see as we age, that changes. So from 15 to 29, we see thyroid cancer becomes prevalent, breast cancer, prostate, we see again lung cancers, and then in the older age group, colorectal, so cancers of the colon and rectum, and lung cancer become the most prevalent. Now, the previous one showed, so this chart here that I just showed you showed new cases, so incidences of cancer development. And this chart here shows mortality, so a bit different from the last one. Here, when we look at mortality in this age, we see that leukemia, even though it was the most commonly diagnosed, it is not the most deadly. So in individuals aged 0 to 14, brain or central nervous system cancers are more deadly for this age group or have the highest cause of mortality. And as we go forward here, brain cancer still predominates in the 15 to 29 age group, followed by breast. And then above the age of 50, we see that lung cancer and bronchus cancer, so of the respiratory tract, become the highest causes of mortality associated with cancer. So above the age of 50, we see that it's lung. So we can see these trends, right, in cancer incidence and also in mortality. So these are two different terms that we're looking at here. And I'd like you to just have an idea of the trends, whether that be for the previous charts based on sex, based on the most prevalent types of cancer, and also in particular age groups. So knowing that age has an influence on the likelihood of developing a particular type of cancer. Okay, so now for a positive note, now that we have kind of introduced the societal impact and the prevalence of cancer, now we do see changes over time. And so here in this chart, we are seeing the predicted change in 5-year standardized by age. So what is called the net survival. So this chart is looking at the change in net survival of cancer cases, where the net survival is higher. So where the number of people who are surviving these types of cancer is higher, it shows that for that given year, the net survival is greater for that decade. So we see a steady increase, right? We're seeing over decades, this is showing 5-year diagnosis period. So within a 5-year period and over time, we are seeing a steady increasing trend. Cancer is not always deadly, and this data shows the positive trend in cancer survival rates from 1992 to 2017. And so we're seeing a very steady increase in survival as a result of modern medicine and new advances in treatment and technology. So we see a much lower net survival rate of about 55% across these provinces that this graph is showing in Canada in 1992. And we see this very steady increase to 2017. So this looks like a 10-year longitudinal data collection. So perhaps in 2027, there will be kind of an update on this, but it's hopeful and expected that we'll continue to see this increasing trend. So again, specific numbers are not important here, but just noting that over the last, 20 or so years or so, we're seeing this steady trend in an increase in net survival. So an increase in the percent of the population that is surviving after a cancer diagnosis. Now, there are many factors that affect these changes in survival rates. So nearly 4 in 10 cancers in Canada could be prevented by reducing exposure to known risk factors. So scientists have uncovered through research and through better understanding the human body and also various factors of our environment that there are certain things that increase the risk of developing cancers, and they can be specific to the type of cancer. For example, this has been widely known for a long time, but tobacco smoking heavily influences the risk of developing lung, mouth, throat, even pancreatic and bladder cancer. So many types of cancers are shown to be very heavily related to tobacco smoking, which highly increases the risk of developing these type of cancers. We know that UV radiation, such as sun or even tanning beds, are large contributors to skin cancer. And so protecting yourself from this UV radiation from the sun with sunscreen and so forth is helpful in preventing and reduces the risk of developing skin cancer. A healthy diet, high in polyphenols, right, veggies, fruits, high fiber, is actually associated with a reduced risk in developing cancer of the rectum and colon, and possibly other cancers as well, those antioxidants that are in these healthy foods. And we know that obesity and excess body fat is associated with an increased risk of various cancers, particularly breast cancer, postmenopause, colorectal, and endometrial. Regular physical activity has been shown, and those who are more active have been shown to have a lower risk of developing various types of cancers. And recently, it's been known for some time that alcohol is associated with particular types of cancers, including liver, stomach, breast, liver, and oral cancers. But very recently, studies have come out showing that any amount of alcohol consumption, so any amount of alcohol at all, is associated with an increased risk of many different cancers. And finally, some vaccinations, such as that for HPV, have strong evidence of preventing certain types of cancers, such as cervical cancer. So the big key here, early detection is key, and we're going to talk about screening measures, but it is also a silver lining that research has uncovered, known factors that increase the risk of developing cancer, and also, lifestyle changes that can be accomplished to help us with reducing that risk as well. Okay, so another term we have here, we already talked about the occurrence or the incidence, but let's highlight incidence rate. So incidence rate is the number of individuals with a particular disease per some number, usually about 100,000 of the population. So for 100,000 people in a population, what number of individuals have that particular disease? That's the incidence rate. The number of individuals within a certain number of people who have a particular disease. So this allows us to create a fair and standard way to compare values from different areas geographically. So we can more accurately compare between different groups of different sizes even as well, if we can standardize it by the number of individuals. So these two graphs are just kind of modeling incidence rate. So we can see new cases, we can organize it by males and females, and we can see for a given year per 100,000 people, how many individuals have, been diagnosed with the given disease. Another thing that we can do here to kind of standardize this even more is age standardized incidence rate, or ASIR. This is a mathematical calculation that can be used to equalize differences in age group. So now we're adding another level of standardizing or specificity here. So for example, Say Ontario has twice as many elderly individuals compared to British Columbia. Therefore, it would be reasonable to expect that there would be twice as many age-related diseases, right? So diseases that are associated with higher age groups, if that given population has a larger elderly percentage. But this does not mean that Ontario has a higher chance of getting those diseases, right? So just because we're seeing a higher incidence of a given disease in a particular population, that doesn't mean that that has to do with the location. It may more so be associated with the specifics of the population. So if there are more elderly individuals, then we might see, a higher incidence of, as we saw, mortalities due to lung cancers. We saw that the highest or leading cause of mortality in the elderly individuals aged around 80, I think for the 59 to 70 age group as well, was lung cancer. And so this age standardized incidence rate allows us to create those statistics that are specific to age group. And that we can see here. So now in this graph, we can see we've added in age. So by year and then by specific age, and we can still keep it as individuals, so males or females, and we see new cases that develop. Okay. And so this chart kind of shows that across different geographical regions. So it's showing the geographic distribution of projected new cancer cases and age standardized incidence rates. So now we've performed that standardization by age, and we've organized this by province. So this chart, really the takeaway here is just to show that, as we said on the last slide, even though we see a higher incidence of particular cancers in a given region, such as here we see in Ontario, we see that, for Ontario, 545.9 per 100,000 individuals, or 91,600 new cases. The key here is just noting that just because a population has a higher percentage of that particular disease, that does not mean that it's the location or factors specifically about the region. It could be more due to age distribution, and so forth. Okay, so I'm going to pause this video here, and please stay tuned for part 2. We're going to start talking a little bit more about the cancer biology in the next video.